She married the Paralyzed Millionaire, by contract until one night changed everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The rain came down in silver sheets outside the glass walls of St. Augustine Medical Center, the kind of cold rain that made the world look both alive and lonely at the same time. Evelyn Carter tightened her worn beige coat around her shoulders as she hurried through the nearly empty lobby, clutching a folder filled with unpaid bills. Her shoes squeaked softly against the tile floor. The night shift was ending, but her day was far from over. "Nurse Carter," a voice called from behind. Dr. Grant waved her over, his expression unreadable. "Someone's asking for you upstairs. Room 702, the VIP wing." Evelyn frowned. "There must be a mistake. That's not my patient." "He requested you by name," the doctor said simply. "Go," the elevator chimed, and a moment later, Evelyn found herself stepping into a quiet corridor lined with expensive art and polished marble. Everything here smelled like money. She hesitated at the frosted glass door before knocking gently. "Come in," a deep voice replied. Inside, the lights were dim. A man sat by the window in a wheelchair, his back straight, his hands still on the wheels. The glow from the city lights outlined his sharp profile, dark hair, silver cufflinks, eyes that looked tired of pretending. "You're Evelyn Carter," he said, his tone more like a statement than a question. "Yes, sir," she answered cautiously. "I was told you wanted to see me." The man turned his chair to face her. "I'm Adrian Cole." The name hit her like a jolt. Adrian Cole, the tech millionaire whose accident last year had made headlines. He'd vanished from the public eye ever since, rumored to be paralyzed from the waist down. "I need someone to marry me," he said plainly. Evelyn blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. "Excuse me?" "Marry me," he repeated. "Legally. For 6 months. In return, I'll pay you $500,000. The words hung in the air, cold and impossible. "This isn't a joke," he added when she didn't answer. "My company's board is trying to declare me unfit to lead because of my condition. A marriage stabilizes the image. It's strategy." "And why me?" Evelyn asked quietly. He studied her for a long moment. "Because you're not part of my world, and you need the money." Her breath caught. He was right. Her brother's spinal surgery cost more than she could ever earn in a lifetime of double shifts. She looked at his motionless legs, the sleek black chair, the faint tremor in his hands. "This is insane," she whispered. "Maybe," he said, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "But sometimes sanity is overrated." A flash of lightning filled the room, throwing their faces into sharp relief, two people trapped by circumstance, daring to cross a line neither of them understood. The rain beat harder against the glass as Evelyn whispered, "What are the terms?" Adrian wheeled closer, sliding a single page across the table. "No affection, no intrusion. You appear at 5 events as my wife. At the end, you walk away with your freedom and your brother's chance to walk again." Evelyn's hand trembled as she took the pen. Her reflection flickered in the polished table surface. Next to his, a nurse with nothing left to lose, and a millionaire who'd lost everything money couldn't buy. "All right," she breathed, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Where do I sign?" Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, their fates quietly collided. The next morning, Evelyn woke to the sound of her alarm echoing through her small apartment. For a moment she forgot the storm, the offer, the impossible words that had changed everything. Then the memory hit her. "Marry me. 6 months. $500,000. She sat up slowly, staring at the signed contract on her table. Her hands still trembled from the night before. Outside, the rain had stopped, but her world felt heavier. By noon, she was back at St. Augustine Medical Center, waiting for Adrian Cole's car to arrive. The black limousine pulled up with perfect precision, its door opening like a command. A man in a tailored suit stepped out first. "Miss Carter?" he asked. "I am Mr. Cole's assistant, Daniel. We will handle everything from here." Everything felt unreal. The courthouse ceremony was quick and cold, just as Adrian had promised. A few signatures, a judge's nod, 2 strangers bound by ink. Adrian sat in his wheelchair the entire time, silent, his expression unreadable. When it was done, he turned to her and said quietly, "Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Cole." The title felt foreign on her tongue. That afternoon, Daniel drove them to Adrian's penthouse overlooking the Hudson River. The elevator doors opened to reveal glass walls, soft gray tones, and the smell of expensive silence. Evelyn clutched her small suitcase like a shield. "You will stay in the guest room," Adrian said, his tone professional. "We will appear together when necessary. I prefer privacy." She nodded. "Understood." He gestured toward a document on the marble counter. "Your schedule for the week. There is a dinner on Friday. You will attend." Evelyn tried to meet his eyes, but he had already turned away, rolling toward his study. The sound of the motorized wheels echoed in the still air. Later that night, she unpacked in the guest room a space too large, too perfect. She ran her fingers along the polished dresser, trying to imagine what kind of man lived like this. On the nightstand lay a single-framed photograph of Adrian before the accident, standing tall beside a sleek silver car, smiling like someone who owned the world. It was hard to connect that man to the quiet figure behind the office door. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Daniel appeared with a clipboard. "Mr. Cole asked me to remind you that privacy is part of the contract. Please avoid entering the rehabilitation wing without permission." Evelyn nodded again, feeling more like an employee than a wife. When he left, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the city lights. $500,000. Her brother's surgery. That was the reason. She repeated it like a mantra until her heartbeat slowed. Down the hall, Adrian watched the rain streak across the glass wall of his study. The city glowed beneath him, alive and unreachable. His hands rested on the arms of the wheelchair, the faintest tremor running through his fingers. He told himself this marriage was nothing more than business. Yet when he recalled the look in Evelyn's eyes, nervous, determined, kind, something inside him shifted, a crack in the armor he had spent a year building. Midnight came quietly. Evelyn padded into the kitchen for a glass of water. She froze when she heard a faint sound from the next room, a muffled crash followed by silence. She pushed the door open slightly and saw Adrian struggling beside the couch, the wheelchair tipped halfway. Without thinking, she rushed in. "Mr. Cole!" He looked up, startled, pride and frustration flashing across his face. "I told you not to. You need help," she interrupted firmly, grabbing his arm and steadying him. For a heartbeat, they stayed that way, close enough for her to feel the warmth of his skin. His breath came shallow, his jaw tight. "Thank you," he said finally, voice low. She helped him back into the chair, their hands brushing. "I was just trying to reach the remote," he muttered, half embarrassed. She smiled faintly. "Next time, just call your wife." For the first time, he met her eyes and almost smiled. Then the moment passed, replaced by silence. But somewhere in that silence, something fragile had begun. Neither of them knew it yet, but that single, ordinary night would be the first time the contract started to feel like something real. Days turned into a quiet rhythm inside the penthouse. Evelyn woke early each morning, made breakfast, and went through her nursing shifts before returning to the glass tower that now called her name. Every night, the same routine repeated itself: silence, distance, and the soft hum of Adrian's wheelchair as he moved through the halls like a ghost of the man he used to be. Yet beneath that quiet pattern, something was changing. One evening, while preparing tea in the kitchen, Evelyn heard the faint sound of piano keys drifting from the far end of the apartment. She followed the melody to find Adrian sitting in front of an old black piano, his fingers awkwardly trying to press the keys. He stopped when he noticed her, the music cutting short. "I did not know you played," she said softly. "I used to," he replied, his voice low. "Before the accident, before I forgot what peace sounded like." For a moment neither spoke. Then she stepped forward, placing the teacup beside him. "Maybe peace does not come from playing perfectly. Maybe it comes from trying again." His lips twitched, almost a smile. "You talk like a therapist." "I am a nurse," she said gently. "It comes with the job." He looked at her for a long second before nodding. "Then maybe I should listen." It was the first real conversation they had shared. From that night on, small cracks appeared in the walls between them. Evelyn noticed the way he watched the sunrise from the balcony every morning, and how he touched his wedding ring absent-mindedly, as if trying to believe it was real. Adrian noticed the way she hummed while cooking, the soft rhythm filling the silence he once preferred. One afternoon, Daniel entered with a clipboard. "Mr. Cole, the gala committee confirmed your attendance for Friday. They expect Mrs. Cole to accompany you." Evelyn froze. "Gala?" Adrian sighed. "It is a charity event. My company sponsors the hospital's rehabilitation wing. Appearances matter." "You do not think I will embarrass you, do you?" she asked. His gaze softened slightly. "On the contrary, you might save me from them." Friday came faster than either expected. Evelyn stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the midnight blue gown Daniel had arranged for her. She had never worn anything so fine. The bracelet on her wrist caught the light, engraved with tiny words she had never noticed before. "Courage is quiet." When she entered the living room, Adrian's breath caught. Dressed in a black suit, his presence still commanded the room despite the chair. "You look presentable," he said after a pause. She smiled knowingly. "You almost said beautiful." "Almost," he admitted, and she laughed for the first time since moving in. At the gala, flashbulbs exploded as they entered. The crowd whispered, intrigued by the mysterious new Mrs. Cole. Evelyn stayed close, feeling the weight of every stare. When a journalist asked how they met, she hesitated, but Adrian answered smoothly. "Fate has a strange sense of humor," he said, his tone calm but protective. As the evening went on, Evelyn found herself watching him differently. The way he handled questions, the patience in his eyes, the quiet authority that did not need standing tall to be felt. When someone at the table made a cruel joke about his wheelchair, Evelyn leaned forward and said clearly, "A man's worth is not measured by the miles he walks, but by the strength it takes to keep moving." The room fell silent. Adrian looked at her, surprise flickering into pride. "Well said, Mrs. Cole," he murmured, his voice warm. Later, as the music swelled and the guests began to dance, Evelyn stood by the balcony, gazing out at the city lights. She did not notice Adrian roll up beside her until he spoke quietly. "You handled yourself well tonight." "Thank you," she said. "I only spoke what I believed." He turned his head slightly, studying her face illuminated by the soft city glow. "You are not what I expected, Evelyn Carter." She met his eyes, the air between them charged with something unspoken. "Neither are you, Mr. Cole." For a long moment, neither moved. The sound of laughter and distant music faded behind them. The night breeze brushed her hair across his shoulder, and he did not move away. For the first time since their contract began, silence did not feel like distance. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them dared to name. The next few weeks passed like a slow awakening. The penthouse, once filled with nothing but echoes, now carried traces of warmth. Adrian found himself waiting for the sound of Evelyn's footsteps in the morning, the gentle clink of her teacup, the way she hummed while watering the plants by the balcony. Their arrangement was still a contract, but life within those glass walls had begun to resemble something closer to home. One afternoon, as sunlight poured through the tall windows, Adrian wheeled into the living room and found Evelyn sketching by the window, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You draw," he said, surprise in his tone. She looked up and smiled shyly. "A little. It helps me think." He rolled closer, studying the unfinished page. It was a portrait of the skyline from their balcony, drawn in soft pencil lines. "You see the world differently," he murmured. "Most people would focus on the buildings, not the light between them." She met his eyes. "Maybe that is because the light matters more than what tries to block it." The words lingered in the air. Later that week, Adrian's physical therapist canceled last minute, and Evelyn offered to help. He hesitated but agreed. "If I fall, it is your fault," he joked lightly, breaking the ice. She grinned. "Deal." The session was awkward at first, filled with silence and concentration, but something shifted when he managed to take 2 small steps using the support bar. "You did it," she said breathlessly. He looked up, sweat on his forehead, disbelief in his eyes. "I actually did." Without thinking, she reached out and hugged him. The warmth of her arms, the closeness of her heartbeat, it startled them both. She pulled away quickly, her cheeks flushed. "Sorry, that was unprofessional." He smiled faintly. It was perfect. That night, Adrian could not sleep. He stared at the ceiling, the ghost of her touch still lingering. For the first time since the accident, he felt alive. But just as something beautiful began to grow, the outside world started closing in. The next morning, Daniel entered with tense eyes. "Mr. Cole, a journalist has been asking questions about your marriage. Someone from inside the company leaked your contract." Adrian's expression hardened. "Who?" "We are not sure yet, but I suspect your half-sister, Rebecca." He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "Make sure she regrets it." Evelyn overheard the conversation from the hallway. Her stomach twisted. A leak meant exposure, humiliation, pity, scandal. That night, she found Adrian in his study, staring out at the city. "Is it true?" she asked quietly. "About the leak?" He turned his chair toward her. "Yes, they want to use it to discredit me, to make the board believe I am unfit to lead." "And me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What do they think of me?" He hesitated. "They think you were paid." The words hit her like a slap. She stepped back, her eyes shining with disbelief. "Were paid? I was paid, Adrian. You made sure of that." His eyes darkened. "Do not twist this, Evelyn. You agreed. I agreed to a marriage, not to be humiliated." Her voice broke, but she refused to cry. "I stood beside you when people mocked you, when they called you broken. Did you ever stop to think how this would make me look?" He looked away, guilt flickering behind his cold composure. "You knew what this was." "Yes," she said softly, "but I also thought it had become something more." She turned before he could respond, her footsteps echoing down the marble hall. Adrian sat there in silence, the storm inside him louder than the rain outside. For the first time, his wealth and power could not fix what he had broken. Down in the lobby, Evelyn stood clutching her small suitcase, the night wind tangling her hair. She whispered to herself, $500,000 cannot buy dignity. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Adrian's reflection in the glass looked smaller than ever, a man surrounded by everything money could buy, yet losing the only thing that made it all mean something. The morning after Evelyn left, the penthouse felt like a hollow echo of its former self. Adrian wheeled through the silent halls, every corner reminding him of her laughter, her warmth, the sound of her voice telling him to believe again. The city outside looked the same, but everything inside him had shifted. He tried to distract himself with work, but the board meeting only worsened the ache. Rebecca sat across from him, a smug smile on her painted lips. "It is a shame, brother," she said smoothly. "The press is calling your marriage a publicity stunt. They are questioning your ability to lead. Perhaps it is time you step down." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You leaked it, did you not?" She leaned back in her chair, feigning innocence. "Leaks happen. Maybe people just deserve to know the truth." He did not answer. He simply looked at her with a calm so cold it made her glance away. "If you think this will destroy me," he said quietly, "you have underestimated what I am willing to fight for." That night, alone in the dim light of his study, Adrian opened his laptop. On the screen was Evelyn's brother's medical file. The hospital balance read, "Paid in full." He had wired the money days ago, before everything fell apart, but he had never told her. Now she was gone, and she did not know that he had kept his promise. He closed his eyes, exhaustion and regret weighing heavier than the chair beneath him. Meanwhile, across the city, Evelyn returned to her old apartment. The walls felt smaller, the air heavier. Her brother, Michael, was recovering well, already walking short distances after his surgery. "You did this for me," he said softly, holding her hand. "I will not waste the chance you gave me." She smiled faintly, hiding the pain behind her eyes. "Just get better, that is all that matters." But late at night, when the city was quiet, she replayed every look, every word, every almost smile from Adrian. She hated herself for missing him, for still wondering if what they had felt was ever real. A week later, the world answered her question. A headline flashed across every news channel. Courage Foundation Gala announced by Adrian Cole. Underneath the headline was a quote, his quote, "Real strength is not in standing tall, but in standing true." Evelyn stared at the screen. Her bracelet, the one he had given her, gleamed under the light. She turned it in her hand, reading the tiny words engraved inside. "Courage is quiet." Her heart pounded. The gala was scheduled for Saturday. She told herself she would not go, that it was not her place anymore. But when Saturday arrived, something inside her refused to stay home. She arrived at the grand hall in a simple dress, unnoticed among the glittering crowd. On stage, Adrian sat upright in his chair, looking stronger than she had ever seen him. The lights dimmed, and a large screen came to life behind him, showing a series of paintings, sketches of the city, the light between the buildings. Her sketches. This exhibit, Adrian's voice echoed through the microphone, steady and calm, is called The Light Between. It was inspired by someone who reminded me that even broken things can still reflect beauty. Gasps rippled through the audience. Evelyn stood frozen. He continued, "She taught me that courage does not always roar. Sometimes, it whispers in the quiet acts of kindness that change everything." He turned his head slightly, and for the first time, their eyes met across the room. "Evelyn Carter," he said softly into the mic, "if you are here tonight, this stage belongs to you as much as it does to me." Her knees felt weak. The crowd parted as she stepped forward, tears blurring the lights. When she reached him, he smiled, something deep and genuine lighting his face. "I should have told you sooner," he said, his voice trembling. "Your brother's surgery was paid before you ever walked away, because you deserved freedom, not guilt." Evelyn's tears fell freely now. "You never owed me anything," she whispered. "No," he said gently, "but I wanted to." The room faded around them, leaving only the two of them in the glow of the lights. And for the first time, both of them felt whole. The audience erupted in applause, but Evelyn could hardly hear it. The world around her blurred as she looked at Adrian, sitting on the stage beneath the golden light, his eyes fixed on her as if no one else existed. Slowly, she stepped closer, her heels echoing on the marble floor until she stood right before him. "You should not have done all of this," she whispered, her voice shaking. Adrian smiled faintly. "I had to. You once told me that light matters more than what blocks it. You were my light, Evelyn." She opened her mouth to speak, but emotion stole her words. The crowd watched in silence as Adrian extended his hand. "Stay," he said softly. "Not for the contract, not for the cameras, just for me." Evelyn hesitated for a breath that felt like forever, then placed her hand in his. The hall erupted again, but for the two of them, it was only quiet. After the gala, the night air outside was cool and soft. They rode in silence back to the penthouse that had once felt like a cage, and now somehow felt like the safest place on earth. As the elevator doors closed, Adrian turned to her. "There is something I want to show you." He guided his chair toward the therapy room, the one she had been told never to enter. The door slid open, revealing a space filled with medical equipment and a wide mirror across the wall. "I have been working harder these past weeks," he said quietly. "Your words kept me going." Evelyn blinked in surprise. "You mean the therapy?" He nodded and positioned his chair near the bars. With slow, deliberate motion, he locked the wheels, gripped the metal rails, and began to rise. The effort was visible on his face, every muscle straining, but he did not stop. Inch by inch, he lifted himself until he was standing. His legs trembled, but he stood. "Adrian," she breathed, tears filling her eyes, "you are standing." He looked at her reflection in the mirror, his chest heaving. "Because of you." She rushed forward, steadying him, afraid he might fall. "Do not push yourself." He smiled weakly. "If I fall, you will catch me. You always have." She laughed through her tears, her hands trembling against his. "You stubborn man." "You love that about me," he said softly. She froze, meeting his eyes. The world held its breath. "Yes," she whispered, "I think I do." He reached up, brushing a tear from her cheek with unsteady fingers. "Then that is enough." The weight of the moment settled between them, raw and real. For the first time, there were no lies, no contracts, no walls left standing. The next morning, the story of the gala spread across every news outlet. Headlines read, "Adrian Cole walks again," and "The love story that defied a contract." Reporters gathered outside the building, but inside, the world was quiet. Evelyn prepared breakfast, humming softly, while Adrian wheeled into the kitchen, the morning sun casting soft light over his face. "I think we made the news," she said, sliding him a cup of coffee. "Good or bad?" he asked. "Depends," she teased. "Do you like being the hero?" "Only if you are the reason." He took a sip and looked at her over the rim of the cup, eyes warm. "So what happens now, Mrs. Cole?" She smiled, walking around the counter to stand behind him. "Now," she said, leaning close, "we learn what it means to have a real marriage." Adrian reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "No contracts," he said. "No secrets," she added, "only us." Outside, the city kept moving, indifferent to their quiet victory. But inside that glass penthouse, two souls who had once been broken found their way back to each other. Adrian looked out at the river, the sunlight dancing across the water, and whispered, "One night changed everything." Evelyn smiled, resting her hand on his shoulder. "Yes," she said softly, "and it was the best decision either of us ever made." The camera of the mind panned out over the skyline, two figures framed in gold light, proof that love built on truth could heal even the deepest wounds. For a while, peace finally settled over their lives. The days turned into a calm rhythm, no longer forced by contracts or obligations but by choice. Adrian continued his therapy, and every small victory felt like a shared triumph. He could now take several steps on his own, each one steadier than the last. Evelyn was by his side every morning, encouraging him through every exercise, her laughter filling the once empty halls of the penthouse. For the first time in years, Adrian's world felt alive again. But peace, as he knew too well, never lasted long in his world. One afternoon, as he finished a video conference, Daniel entered his office with an uneasy expression. "Mr. Cole," he said carefully, "there is something you should see." He handed him a file and a tablet showing a leaked article. "Rebecca is suing you. She claims the company's assets were misused to fund personal ventures, specifically your wife's art exhibition." Adrian's blood ran cold. "She is calling it embezzlement," Daniel added. "She wants to push for a criminal inquiry." Adrian leaned back in his chair, his mind spinning. "She will stop at nothing," he muttered. "Get the legal team ready." But before Daniel could reply, Evelyn entered the office, holding 2 cups of coffee. She froze when she saw the tension in the room. "What happened?" Adrian hesitated. "Rebecca is trying to destroy us again," he said quietly. "She is accusing me of using company funds for your exhibition." Evelyn's face paled. "But that is not true. That was from your personal account." "I know," he said firmly, "but the press will not care. They love a scandal." She set the cups down, her hands shaking slightly. "Then let me speak," she said. "Let me clear it." Adrian's voice hardened. "No, I will not let you get dragged into this. I started this war. I will finish it." Evelyn took a step closer. "We started this together, Adrian. I am not going anywhere." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for a moment, the weight on his chest eased. That night, as the city glowed beneath them, they sat side by side on the balcony. The air was cool, and the sound of the river carried softly through the distance. "When I met you," Adrian said quietly, "I thought I was hiring a solution, not finding a reason." Evelyn smiled faintly. "And I thought I was signing away my freedom, not finding my home." He reached for her hand. "Whatever happens next, I want you to know, I will never let them take away what we built." She squeezed his hand. "Then we faced them together." The next morning, they arrived at the courthouse. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Evelyn kept her head high, her hand steady in Adrian's. Inside, Rebecca sat with her attorneys, her expression cold and triumphant. The hearing dragged on for hours. Evidence was presented, accusations thrown, but Adrian remained calm. When his turn came to speak, he rose from his chair slowly, his movements deliberate. The entire courtroom held its breath as he took a few unassisted steps to the podium. The act itself was a statement: resilience, dignity, defiance. "The funds used for the exhibition," he said steadily, "came from my personal account. I created that exhibition to honor the woman who reminded me what real strength looks like. If that is a crime, then I am guilty of loving her too much." Murmurs filled the courtroom. Rebecca's lawyers tried to object, but the judge silenced them. Moments later, the final verdict was read, all charges dismissed. Adrian exhaled slowly, as Evelyn covered her mouth in disbelief. Outside, reporters surrounded them, shouting for a statement. Adrian turned to them and said simply, "Courage is quiet. Truth speaks for itself." He then took Evelyn's hand and led her away from the noise, their fingers interlocked. That night, as they returned home, Evelyn turned to him, tears glistening in her eyes. "You stood up for me," she whispered. "No," he said softly. "I stood because of you." She smiled through her tears, and together they looked out at the skyline. For the first time, they both knew the fight was over, and they had won it not with power or wealth, but with love that refused to break. The weeks after the trial felt lighter, as if a storm had finally passed. The world that once doubted them now spoke of them with awe. Headlines praised Adrian's courage and Evelyn's loyalty, calling them the couple that turned a contract into love. Yet for the two of them, none of that mattered. What mattered was the quiet routine they had built together, a life shaped not by money or reputation but by small, ordinary moments that felt extraordinary because they shared them. Adrian had fully regained the ability to walk short distances without assistance. Each step was still slow and measured, but Evelyn was always there beside him, her hand ready whenever he stumbled. "You are getting stronger," she told him one morning as they stood on the balcony watching the sunrise. He smiled softly. "Because you taught me how to keep standing." She rested her head on his shoulder. "You would have done it anyway. You just needed someone to remind you that you still could." Their mornings were peaceful, but life had a way of testing the promises people made in the calm. One afternoon, Adrian received a letter from the hospital foundation board inviting him to deliver the keynote speech for the annual charity gala. He hesitated. The last time he stood before a crowd, it had nearly broken him. "You should do it," Evelyn said gently. "You have a story the world needs to hear." "A story about pain and mistakes?" he asked with a bitter laugh. She shook her head. "A story about healing, about second chances." That night, he sat at his desk, staring at the blank page before him. The city lights reflected in the window like scattered stars, and for a long time, he thought about the man he used to be: proud, untouchable, afraid of needing anyone. Then he thought of her, the woman who had walked into his darkness and stayed until he found the light again. The next day, he began to write. The evening of the gala arrived with soft music and shimmering lights. The hall was filled with people from every corner of the city, but Evelyn stood out in her simple white dress, elegance born of grace, not wealth. When Adrian took the stage, silence fell. He walked without the wheelchair, supported only by his cane, and every eye followed him with admiration. He began quietly, his voice calm and sure. "A year ago, I believed strength meant never needing help. I believed love was a distraction. I believed money could fix anything. I was wrong. Real strength is not in independence, but in connection. Love is not weakness. It is what makes us whole. And money," he paused, glancing toward Evelyn in the front row. "Money can buy comfort, but it cannot buy peace." Applause rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's eyes glistened with pride. Adrian continued, "This foundation was built to help those who cannot stand on their own, just as I once could not. But sometimes, healing does not come from medicine. Sometimes, it comes from someone who refuses to give up on you." When he finished, the entire room rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous, but all he could see was Evelyn, smiling through her tears. After the event, they slipped away from the crowd and walked along the river. The city glowed behind them, its lights reflecting on the water. "You were amazing tonight," she said softly. "You sounded like the man I always knew you were." He looked at her with quiet affection. "And you looked like the reason I became him." She laughed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Do you ever get tired of saying the perfect thing?" "Only when you stop smiling afterward," he teased. They stopped near the bridge where the river curved, the same spot where he had once watched life go by from the back seat of a car, trapped by his own fear. Now he stood beside her, free. "Evelyn," he said after a long pause, "you once told me that light matters more than what blocks it. You were right. You were the light that saved me." She squeezed his hand gently. "And you were the man who taught me that love is not something you find. It is something you build." As the wind carried their laughter across the water, it felt like the world had finally made sense. In that quiet, golden moment, they both knew their story was no longer about contracts or survival. It was about love that endured, not because it was easy, but because it was real. The seasons changed, and with them, so did everything in Adrian and Evelyn's lives. A year after the night of the gala, their love had become something strong and steady, like the river that flowed outside their window. The penthouse that once symbolized loneliness now carried laughter, warmth, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee every morning. Adrian had sold part of his company to fund the Courage Foundation full-time, dedicating his life to helping others who had lost what he once did hope. Evelyn, meanwhile, had become the creative director of the foundation's art therapy program, using her sketches and her heart to heal others. Every wall of the center was filled with drawings made by patients who had found light again because someone believed in them. On a bright spring morning, Evelyn walked into the foundation's rooftop garden, carrying a small bouquet of white lilies. She found Adrian standing by the railing, cane in hand. the wind brushing through his hair. "You are early," she teased. He turned, smiling. "You taught me not to waste a sunrise." She handed him the flowers. "For the dedication ceremony, they asked me to decorate the stage, but I think these belong here instead." He looked at the lilies, then at her. "Do you remember the night you said yes?" he asked. She laughed softly. "Which one? The contract or the real one?" "The second," he said, stepping closer. "The one that mattered." She smiled, eyes shining. "I remember. You were nervous. You kept pretending your leg hurt so you would not have to kneel." "That was strategy," he said with mock seriousness, "not fear." She chuckled, then grew quiet. "Adrian, did you ever imagine life would turn out like this?" He shook his head. "No, I thought I was marrying a stranger to save my company. I never knew I was marrying the one who would save me." Her throat tightened with emotion. "You do realize that sounds like something out of a movie, right?" "Good," he said, "because I plan on giving it a proper ending." Before she could respond, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught. "Adrian," she whispered, "we are already married." "By contract," he said softly. "But not by choice, not until now." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold ring, the words, "Courage is quiet," engraved inside. "Evelyn Carter Cole," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "you turned a broken life into something whole. Will you marry me again, not as a deal, but as a promise?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and the crowd that had gathered for the dedication applauded. The moment was simple yet perfect. Two people who had found love not in grand gestures, but in the quiet courage to begin again. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, the foundation held its opening ceremony. Adrian stood on the stage with Evelyn beside him, addressing the audience. "This place," he said, "is built on one truth, that no matter how broken we are, there is always a way back to the light. Sometimes, that light is another person." He turned toward her, smiling. "Mine was standing right here all along." When the lights dimmed and the crowd dispersed, they stayed behind, watching the city glow beneath them. "Do you ever miss the old life?" Evelyn asked. Adrian took her hand gently. "Not for a second. I spent too many years chasing success and forgetting what mattered. Now I wake up and remember why I fight, because you are beside me." She leaned her head against his shoulder, whispering, "You know, you never really lost your strength. You just had to learn a new way to stand." He kissed her forehead softly. "And you were my reason to try." The night breeze carried their laughter across the rooftop, mingling with the sounds of the city below. For the first time, they both felt completely at peace. The story that had begun with a contract ended with a promise that love built on truth could outlast every storm. And as they stood there under the silver glow of the moon, Adrian whispered the same words that had started it all. "One night changed everything." Evelyn smiled through her tears. "Yes," she said quietly, "and it changed us forever."